And I know that, pace yourself, don't do too much, all those little guidelines. But when you're in it, it's a lot different. And when you have a baby and you're trying to do a simple outing, like go to the doctor's appointment and then grab a coffee, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've overdone it. But it's like, what do I do now? And then also one thing I wasn't kind of aware of was that the bleeding, there's still a lot of vaginal bleeding after a section. Like they take out as much as they can, but you're still, losing the layers of the things that were keeping your baby supported. So if you've overdone it, one of the signs is extra bleeding. And so when you start to feel it, you've already overdone it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you're thirsty, it's like you really should have drank water before.
It's truth bombs left and right over here. Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Cooley. I'm the owner of Birth Baby Sleep and host of the Bringing Up Baby podcast. I can't wait to dive into this episode with you. I got to chat with two mamas who were actually in my prenatal classes several months ago, and now both have 6-month-olds. So Megan Gorham has little baby Reese, and Melissa McLeish has baby Amira. So both Megan and Melissa dive into their birth stories, and they also have some really wonderful insights into what they wish they knew beforehand. And I have to say, since talking with these ladies not too long ago and recording for this episode, I've already significantly changed parts of my prenatal classes to include more of this and the resources that we're putting out there, to include more about having a C-section. And because our rates here in Halifax, they are different depending on where you're having your baby. They can vary greatly, but 1 in 5 people having a baby will need a C-section. So it's important that we talk about it and get into more detail than we usually hear about. So without further ado, I would love for you to meet and hear Melissa and Megan chat about their birth stories, share their journey to baby, and also really get into some super insightful and helpful suggestions that might help you along your journey should you need a C-section someday. All right, here we go. Hi, Megan. Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's nice to see you both.
Hi.
Good to see you.
I'm really excited to get into our conversation as usual. But before we do that, I'd love it if do you feel like just popping on and saying hi and just let us know who you are?
Okay, sure. So Melissa McLeish, I live in Tantallon, Nova Scotia. I'm a healthcare manager. And I had my daughter Amira 6 months ago.
Beautiful. So mama to baby Amira. Megan, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Megan. I live in Clayton Park area in Halifax, and I had my son Reese 6 months ago as well. And I'm an OT.
Right. Beautiful. So we were just talking about how you were both participants in my prenatal classes a little short time ago before your little ones arrived. So that's where we first met. But I've been following along a bit on your journeys. We've all kind of, or Melissa and I and Megan and I have touched base a little bit along the way after babies came. And you've both shared just snippets of your stories. And I thought you'd both be great to have on the podcast. So thank you again, both so much for doing this, to really share your experiences, not just about birth, but around, because you both have experience with having a C-section. We know with C-section recovery, we know with birth stories that they're going to be different for everybody. But I'd love for you both to just have an opportunity to kind of share a bit of your experience and what that was like for you. So Melissa, do you feel like sharing a little bit about your journey to baby? What's your birth story? How did this all go down for you?
Sure. So I had a fairly uncomplicated pregnancy. We were quite lucky to get pregnant within the first year of trying. It took a little bit of time, but yeah. And so the pregnancy itself was pretty textbook. I felt like I was one of those really lucky people who got to kind of enjoy it.
Right.
And so, yeah, everything was going really well. When I started to feel my baby moving, all of the movement was always very low. And I always kept asking, what's going on with that? Like, is she just, doing a lot of fist pumps in the air? Like,
right.
because I was told the whole time baby was head down. 20-week ultrasound, baby was head down. Those physical exams, baby was head down, or so they thought, until we figured out she wasn't.
Ah.
So, yeah, so it was at 36 weeks that we found out that she was a frank breech. And so frank breech means that her bum was down, and her bum was actually stuck down, like stuck into my pelvis. So there's some complications that can happen with their hips with that as well. So it was a little bit scary to find out. We found out on a late stage ultrasound that was ordered, just because of the movement and all of that I was feeling. And so it was definitely a shock. Although once I heard it, I was like, that makes a lot more sense with, with
Mm.
all of the movement. Like, okay, now I can picture anatomy and like where things are in my body. But anyway, um, but yeah, it was definitely a shock because up until that point, like I said, very uncomplicated. I had, attended all the prenatal classes. I was gearing up to go. I definitely, throughout my life kind of pictured birth being a certain way, and was that rug was kind of pulled out underneath me. Um, and I think, it's funny because I just remember laying there on the table, and my husband, like the ultrasound tech, had left the room to go get an OB to talk to us about it. And my husband was like, it'll all be okay. And I was like, it'll, it's not though, like, and it doesn't have to be, right?
Mm.
Like, we'll see what happens. We'll see what the OB says and go from there. But there's a life experience that, although how hard it is and can be for people, that I might not ever get to experience now. And that's a big thing, right? So anyway, it was kind of a pivotal moment. But yeah, so the OB came back in and they said, you're 36 weeks, your baby's actually fairly small. They have a lot of room. Let's give them some time to flip. And so from there, I did everything. I remember messaging you, Ashley,
Yes,
being
I
like,
remember.
do you know any way to flip babies? I was desperate. I really wanted the chance to try, knowing that a lot of planned vaginal deliveries go the other way as well. But I really wanted the chance to try to have her vaginally. And so I actually left work early, to focus on flipping my baby, and did all of the at home stuff. Like, I feel like I spent the next 4 weeks upside down. Um, and I did, there's acupuncture, there's pelvic floor physio, there's massage, there's all kinds of things that can help flip a baby at that stage. And she was not budging, mostly because she was stuck in my pelvis. So they suggested a manual version procedure. So we went in and did that the day after the hurricane, Fiona. So that was fun. There was no power or anything.
Oh, yeah.
But we convinced them, because they have to do that at a very specific time. Like, they want to give babies the chance to turn on their own. But then, like, just as they're kind of starting to run out of room, that's when they want to do the version, so they don't just flip back to where they're comfortable. So the window just happened to be right after the hurricane. So I convinced them to do it for me because, again, I was very desperate. And do you want me to get into the version procedure too?
Please, why not? Do
It's
it.
an interesting part of the
Well, I'm
experience.
sure,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it's exactly what it sounds. So you lay on the table. It happens in the birth unit in case something happens. And they either have to wheel you away to have a C-section right then and there, or, whatever can happen from there. Maybe they are successful in flipping your baby, but you go into labor or your water breaks or something in the process. So yeah, you go to birth unit, which in and of itself, I was like, this might be my only visit to birth unit. Interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and you lay down, and the OB and a resident put their hands on the outside of your belly, and they manually try and move your baby. Um, it's extremely
Yeah.
painful. They use an ultrasound machine as well, so they kind of like follow, like they find it where their head is, they find it what direction the baby's going in, and what direction they need to move the baby, and then they just kind of go for it. You breathe through it, and Um, they tell you like there's no medication because they want you to be able to feel if there's anything
Right.
happening.
Mhm.
Right.
Like if your baby's starting to protest or anything like that, they want you to be able to feel it. So um, yeah. So it's interesting. So they kind of say like if it's not, if you don't want to continue, just tell us. But they'll try 3 times before giving up. I think I was looking it up, the stat before it happened. I think it's like 4 in 10 are successful. So I knew going in, like there's a good chance this won't happen, but I was willing to try. And I was able to let them try 3 times.
Wow.
And the third time, they got her 75% of the way around, and she just would not go further. And as soon as they took their hands off of my belly, I felt her slip all the way back
Oh gosh.
to her position.
Oh.
uh, yeah, so it was unique, we'll say that. But again, a very emotional experience because that was it. Like, we were at the point that baby was running out of room. If she didn't flip then, she would likely wasn't going to flip on her own. Um, but what that did do was dislodge her bum from my pelvis, so that felt nicer. Um, but it also meant that she was able to get her feet under her, so she was actually a footling breech when she was born. Even more complicated.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. That's a lot to really think about and prep for before baby's even here. So
Mhm.
much going
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Yeah, so from there, they actually gave me the option because of her size and because of what the OB saw that day. Like you have to pass like stress tests and everything in order to do the version. And so what they saw that day was she was, a really healthy baby. She tolerated the version very well, even though she resisted.
Mm-hmm.
She tolerated the stress of it well. And so they actually gave me the option to try to deliver her breech vaginally if a few things lined up. And they kind of like sent me home with the information and just go think of it. But essentially, I would have had to go into labor before my due date. It's my first baby, and I don't have anything really pressing against my cervix. So it's kind of a hard thing to do to go into
Yeah.
labor before your due date in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's only certain OBs at IWK where I was going to be delivering that will support it. And it's also very risky. And you need to have an episiotomy because you need to have forceps. And it's just like, a scary situation.
Yeah.
So that was all on the table if she continued to be a frank breech, but because she ended up getting her feet under her and she was kind of flipping back and forth, feet and bum down in our other ultrasounds after that, it wasn't an option anyway. So glad I didn't have to make that decision.
Mhm.
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so we went in and had a planned C section, which, in some ways, it's certainly, if you're going to have a C section, it's certainly a nice way to do it because it's very calm. There's no emergency about it, right? Like, I have a lot of friends who have had emergency C sections, and this was not that.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so for a planned section, you go in, you get to meet with all of the OBs and the residents and the anesthesiologists and everyone. Everyone comes and talks to you, and then you walk yourself into the OR and you sit down and you have a C-section. So I'll never forget what it felt like driving in for that. Like it felt like, okay, we're going driving to go change the rest of our life, like have a
Right.
baby and change
Right.
that. Like very strange. And knowing that she would, like, we knew what time the C section would be. We knew that about, 10, 15 minutes in, the baby comes out. So we were like, okay, well, like 4 hours from now, we're going to have a baby and we're like at home.
Right. Just so,
So,
yeah, it's different for
Yeah.
sure.
yeah. So that's kind of the journey up to the C section, I
Right.
guess.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that, Melissa. I know that's a lot to just take in and for yourself to do that. So I appreciate you sharing that very much. Megan, would you like to share a bit about your journey?
Yeah, for sure. Very different than Melissa. But similar in the sense that pregnancy was very textbook, like no concerns. No, I actually, again, felt very lucky to not have very many symptoms. Like I felt a little sick in the beginning, but overall it was really great to be pregnant. And I hate the people that kind of say that because I never thought that could really be true, but I really enjoyed being pregnant. There was no issue. The only thing they were monitoring throughout was my blood pressure, but I did have kind of pre-existing hypertension. So that was something that they monitored throughout. When we were getting closer to, I think it was probably around 30 weeks, they started discussing with me that because I had some hypertension, they wouldn't want me to go all the way to 40 weeks. And that was just that the risk of preeclampsia gets higher towards the end, the longer that babies, I think particularly 38 weeks on. So we had been going to the appointments regularly and done the prenatal stuff with you, Ashley, and we were feeling really good and excited. And then I think actually my husband was away for work, and I went into one of the prenatal appointments at the Advocate by myself. And they said something along the lines of, it could be 38 weeks that we induce you. And I was like, what? I'm going to be induced? And they were like, well, we don't want you to go to 40. So how did you kind of think you were going to get there? Do you know what I mean? But I think I just thought in my mind that my body would know what to do, and maybe I would go early. I don't know. So they started throwing around the word induction around like 32 weeks, I think. And I was on my own. And I remember being like, okay, I don't really like the sounds of that. But as things progressed, it was kind of like a certain thing. So before I would hear, you might be induced, you might not. But as the closer we got to 38 weeks, it was like, okay, so when you're induced. And so it was kind of an odd way to find out, because I felt like it wasn't like a definite decision. And then when it felt like it wasn't really mine. Like it was kind of made for me and not with me. But you're following the process. You've never had a baby before. You're kind of just like, okay, that's what we'll do, I guess. And then, so when I went in for the 38 week appointment, it was a Wednesday. And by then I was off work, and she was like, okay, so your blood pressure is a little higher, even with medication. So are you ready to have a baby? And I was like, I guess so. So the OB put me on the induction list. And again, similar to you, Melissa, it's like, okay, now we know we're going to have a baby in a couple of days. Like, this is crazy. It's weird knowing when they're coming in a way. So yeah, so we got the call on that appointment was a Wednesday. We got the call on Friday. We were just like sitting at home watching baseball, like very weird. But yeah, so we arrived and they showed us to the birth unit, and we kind of just sat there and waited to get the process going. But they start the IV right away with the oxytocin, and I think that was all they started with that night. And of course, I was just they said walk the halls. And then I think maybe an hour after having the oxytocin, they decided to do the Foley catheter as well, just to kind of put that mechanical pressure on the cervix to help it open. They had checked me on the Wednesday, and my cervix was like maybe a centimeter dilated, and it was in the right position and everything was looking good. So they were like, this is great. The Foley catheter will work really well for you. I definitely remember those words. And unfortunately, the process of putting in the catheter was just dreadful. There was no medication. There was no anything offered. And it was just like very uncomfortable. Just an immense amount of pressure, I guess, would be the best way to describe it. And I was like, okay, it's okay. They're just putting it in once. It'll be fine. So that night I walked the halls and with my husband, and they would check me and nothing progressed. Check me again, nothing progressed. So in the morning, that was around 4 p.m. that we went in. And then in the morning, there'd be a new OB team on, and they would come in and ask me all the same questions, and they would up the dose a little bit. So they kept upping the dose into the limits that were appropriate for the oxytocin. And unfortunately, but the Foley came out, but it hadn't really done anything, like hadn't really dilated anymore. So they're like, we can put another Foley in and up the dose of your oxytocin, or we could switch you to, I can't remember the name of the other induction drug, but they switched me to that so that I could eat, because you can't eat on oxytocin. And so that I didn't have to have the heart rate monitors hooked up to me, like when I was walking in the halls. So that was a nice little break. So they switched me on that. And that was probably most of the day Saturday. The second catheter went in. It was just as awful as the first one, probably more awful. Again, I'm not told that there's any medication. It's just, kind of grin and bear it. And then I think it was probably Saturday evening when the next shift came on that they were like, we're going to up your dose. We're going to put you back on the oxytocin because this drug doesn't seem to be working very well with you, or whatever it was. So then we're into Saturday night, all Saturday evening. We're not sleeping, of course. We're just kind of hanging out in the room trying to pass time. And then Sunday morning comes along and the new shift came on. And by that point, I'm just kind of defeated and exhausted that I haven't made any progress. There's no real change in how dilated I am. I think maybe like 2 centimeters instead of 1 centimeter. But at that point, I told my husband, I was like, I think we need to make a plan, because I feel like there's no plan. I feel like there's no consistency. I haven't really been told, like, where's the end date on this? Like, it just kind of keeps getting pushed to the next team and the next team and the next team. So like, what's happening? Because nothing's really progressing. So I told my husband, I said, I was getting emotional by that point. I was like, when they come in, I really need you to kind of tell them, like, I'm okay with having a section. If that's where this is heading, like, let's just talk about it. Cause no one had really brought it up. So I was like, if that's what's going to happen, let's just do it. Like, it's Sunday now and I've been here since Friday. So anyway, so they came in and we kind of expressed, like, in terms of, if this isn't progressing, we're okay with having a section. Like, how long are we going to continue this? Anyway, so I think at that point they decided they would put one more Foley catheter in, or maybe that was when the second one did actually fall out. And then they went in and they broke my water. At that point, I'm like, I don't really care. Let's just progress this along. Right. So they did that, and my water did break, and labor started. And I was like, here we go. This is going to happen. And did all the bouncing on the ball and walking and all of the moves you had taught us in class, which was so, so thankful for. But what I meant to say with that was, when they went to break my water, they were like, oh, by the way, the gas is behind you if you want a little bit of gas for this. I was like, the gas has been here the whole time. Like, I've been so uncomfortable since Friday. Like, I had no idea it was behind me. No one told me it was there. No one told me I could use it. I mean, fair enough, I didn't ask for it, but I didn't really know that was an option. Anyway, so I did have the gas for when they broke my water, and you still feel everything, but it just took the edge off just enough that you're not, you can kind of bear it. So then the contractions were coming, and they were coming pretty fast. Like, I would say every couple minutes, and I was getting through them all right with just the gas and Josh's kind of hands on my back, and things were progressing and I was feeling really good about it. I just felt like I was kind of like in the zone, which is weird. I thought I'd be really scared, but I was just kind of ready to do it. And I think they came in to check me, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be ready for that epidural anytime now. So if you could come over soon. So they came and gave me the epidural, which was great. And as soon as they gave me that, basically all the feelings that you're feeling for contractions went away. And then they came back in maybe another 2 hours, and I hadn't progressed at all. So at that point, it is maybe 2.5 centimeters, and it's Sunday night at like 9 p.m. And I've been there since Friday at like 4 p.m. So they were like, what are your thoughts on a section? I was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Let's go do it. So they went in and we did the section, and Reese was born at like 11 or 10:52 that night. So It was a long haul.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, did that feel like a lot? That's a silly question. I'm thinking like that
Yeah.
must have felt like a lot to go
Yeah.
through. And but what we're going to get into really, like, the C-section is by no means an easy way out, or you do like it's just a different experience.
Yeah.
And but still a lot of laboring and stuff went on, and
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
labor went on beforehand. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I never thought that I would care about that. Like I was like, just get the baby out. However the baby comes, I'm happy with. But it's weird because, like Melissa said, you do kind of feel robbed of the opportunity. And even now, I'm like grateful that I got to labor, which is so weird. I never thought that would be something that I would say. But I think
Mm.
it's just like an instinctual thing as a woman. Like you want to be able to see what your body can do. I guess I don't know.
Mm.
And
Yeah. I certainly like I that resonates with me so much, Megan, because well, one thing you said around how they called you and all of that, like I definitely have this weird like my baby's birthday was determined by an OR schedule. Like an admin assistant called me up and said, "This is your baby's birthday," days
yeah,
before it happened. You know, and there's something really weird about
yeah.
that. Um, and yeah, like I never went into labor at all. I was dilated 2 centimeters when she was born, but that was just, you know, like the early practice labor stuff. I never felt a real contraction, you know. So I know a lot of people, I think everyone kind of experiences it differently, but I do feel like I have unfinished business in
Mhm.
some way, you know what I mean? Like
100%. Yeah.
she's born, she's here, she's been here for 6 months. My body is healing, but I still feel like, yeah, like I didn't do the thing that I was prepping to do.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to say it.
Mm.
I feel the same way for
That's
sure.
yeah, yeah. That's so interesting. All I can say, I want to dive more into all of this, and we will. But particularly just with the birth stories and how important it is to really talk about them and think about them and
Mhm.
process them and share them in good ways, like in educational, just kind of informational connection kind of
Yeah.
ways. We're going to be talking more, and I have episodes coming out actually in a few weeks around that stuff and birth stories. So I very much appreciate where you're both coming from, and both sharing all of that. When it comes to your recovery, we've gone through that C-section experience, that surgery. It's definitely a different recovery. There's recovery with childbirth no matter what, but with it, this is a surgery on top of
Yeah.
everything else that is now going on, because now you have a little one to take care of as well. So Melissa, what can you describe a little bit about your experience with the goings on, sort of the hours, days, weeks after having that C-section? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I definitely like in some ways I had an advantage because I was able to kind of talk to friends who I knew who had C-sections going into it and saying like, okay, what do I need to know? Right? And that's something that I was lucky for, and I've seen a lot of friends go into labor without any of the things that I had gotten to do ahead of time, you know, planning for it. So there is a perk there, as much as it's not the way that I wanted this all to happen. Um, but in terms of recovery, like in the hospital itself, I remember thinking there's no possible way I can go home after 2 nights because I don't have a hospital bed at home that can lift my broken body up, you know, and I don't have a bar beside my toilet to lower myself down to
Mm.
use the washroom. I don't, you know, and thinking like stairs at home, how am I going to do that? Because I just felt, yeah, like it's extremely painful. It's a major abdominal surgery. If you had even your appendix out, I feel like you'd get a lot of time off work, but instead you're expected to, you know, be thrown into the throes of newborn life. Um, but yeah, I think like I had done a lot of prep. Like I had put a pack and play with one of those change tables on top and a little bassinet thing on my main floor of my house because I was told I'm not going to want to be going up and down stairs. And you kind of like, for those first, you know, even probably a week, you kind of set up camp on one part of your house, and that's where you stay because it's painful to go anywhere else. And so I'd done that. Another friend of mine said it's really uncomfortable to lay flat on your bed. And if you get there, it's really hard to get up without help. And so they said, make like a pillow fort in your bed basically so you can kind of sleep at an angle so you can get yourself up, which was really good advice. And I feel like so many of my friends since I've had my baby, even if they're planning a vaginal delivery, I'm like, just buy a bunch of pillows, man. Like you might need them, because that was one of the best pieces of advice. I don't know how I would have survived. I don't think I slept flat for like a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, just because, yeah, like one, it's painful, and two, you can't get up without help, or at least I couldn't. I don't know. Yeah. One thing I think that nobody prepares you for, and I was really, really lucky that I had a friend have a C-section literally like a week before me, and she was like, "You need to know this." Was they get you to remove your bandage as long as you've gone home, or, or in the normal amount of time. You don't have a baby in the NICU or what have you. You go home before your bandage comes off. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting experience because up until that point, you haven't seen your incision.
Mm-hmm.
And your incision does, especially in the beginning, it really kind of looks body altering. In time, after it heals, it's not so body altering. But at that point in time, like you still have a bit of your baby bump left. The incision's kind of like tucked up under a fold, sort of. um, and it's a pretty traumatic experience to remove your bandage. And so I was really glad that a friend of mine said, take a moment, take a deep breath, like have your partner around, because you take it off, and if you want, you don't have to look at it that day. You can't see it from above because you still have a bump, but if you want to look at it in the mirror, it is a lot. It's a emotional thing to kind of see your body in a different way and come to terms with the fact that you had surgery, and you're in that like phase of newbornhood where you have had no sleep and your hormones are tanking. So it's an interesting time. So
Right.
I'm glad that I was told that, because that emotional prep
Mm.
I think was really important. I can imagine if I just kind of took it off and looked at it and didn't think about it, like I think I probably would have had a hard time with it. So there's that too, right? I think there's a lot of the emotional side of it. I think that going into a C-section you can do to help yourself along the journey. And that's kind of the big takeaway I think that I had, aside from, there's all kinds of other tips and tricks around like incision care and all of that. But for me, the best pieces of advice were around the emotional side of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
that's huge. That's huge because
mhm.
everyone might take this all a little bit differently and or take the bandage off a different whatever it is, but it's a representation of what you went through. And if it wasn't a journey that you were particularly gung ho about, like it wasn't one that was like you've been saying it was kind of decided upon for you and just the feelings that come with that, then that's going to be a part of you seeing your scar for the first time. And so that's really important. And thank you for sharing that around that mental preparedness for just those kinds of things. And the pillow fort. The pillow fort sounds really good.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Megan, how about yourself? What was your recovery experience like?
Yeah, definitely. I think similar to Melissa, I'd had a friend or my sister, sorry, had, she'll be mad that I called her my friend. She's my friend as well.
Oh, there you go. She's your friend first.
Yeah,
That's nice.
she's my friend first. Yeah. She had a section like a couple months before. So that was my kind of first experience firsthand, having um, seen someone through a section. And I was in the hospital with her. So I remember kind of different things. So I think that definitely prepared me without knowing. Um, but I think it's interesting what you say about the emotional part of the bandage, because it's like all the little things that you didn't really plan for, I guess, would be the best. Like you're planning to deliver your baby vaginally because that's just the way that, your body prepares you for birth. And like I had padsicles made in my freezer and like the peri bottle ready and like a couple different things that friends had given me for vaginal births, and they were all around my house when I got home. And I remember being like, I don't need that, I don't need that, I don't need that, like. And then even just like the way certain underwear would fit, I mean, you're still doing lots of bleeding as well, but it's not just about kind of the vaginal bleeding, but it's also like you don't want the underwear right in the crease of where you had your surgery. So it's like you got to get high waisted things. So it's kind of like all those things that you didn't really, you're already doing so much prep to have the baby, but then it's just like another layer. In terms of the recovery, I feel like it went pretty well, but definitely, yeah, like a lot of pain, more pain than I was expecting. But the pain meds definitely helped with that. And I was definitely more mobile um, than I was expecting in terms of walking, and like stairs and things like that. What weren't an issue, but certainly anything like lie to sit was definitely a challenge. And I work as an OT, so I help people every day kind of get out of bed and get dressed and do the basic things. So it was very strange to be in that kind of dependent role. But I think the thing that I guess I wasn't really prepared for any of it personally, but the part that I wasn't thinking about was the pain that I would have in other parts of my body. So of course your abdomen has been cut through, but because of that, like Melissa said, you probably haven't really been sleeping properly for the past, when you're nearing the end of your pregnancy, you're not really getting those restful sleep. So your hips start to get sore, your back kind of starts to get sore. And so now with the section, now your front's also sore. So it's kind of like there's no real position that you can get comfortable. And I think I was looking forward to that kind of like, oh, I've had my baby and now I can like lay on my belly, or I can get more comfortable in bed. And it's like, no, you gotta delay that a little longer.
Mm-hmm,
um,
mm-hmm.
yeah. And I think the distances. So, I mean, like I said, I work with a lot of people getting back into activity after they've had some type of surgery or accident or whatever. And I know that, pace yourself, don't do too much, all those little guidelines. But when you're in it, it's a lot different. And when you have a baby and you're trying to do a simple outing, like go to the doctor's appointment and then grab a coffee, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've already done it. But it's like, what do I do now? I have to get back to my car. I have to, you know, I
And what did you overdid it? So what did
you
that,
just
you felt your body kind of tell you
yeah,
to, you got to stop.
basically
Yeah.
like, okay, my abs aren't engaging anymore. Like they're not supporting my core. So now I'm just relying on my back, and now my back's tired. So now
Mm.
I'm stuck here, kind of wherever I've landed. And I'm talking like early days. I'm talking like, that
Yeah.
first week. And you're kind of like, well, I got to get back to the car somehow. So you just go through it. And then also one thing I wasn't kind of aware of was that the bleeding, there's still a lot of vaginal bleeding after a section. Like they take out as much as they can, but you're still, losing the layers of the things that were keeping your baby supported. So um, if you've overdone it, one of the signs is extra bleeding. And so when you start to feel it, you've already overdone it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you're thirsty, it's like
Yeah.
you really should
Yeah.
have drank water before.
Oh yeah, it affects
Um,
you so much.
Yeah.
I felt that back pain as well, Megan, and also like at the incision site, I found, I don't know if you felt that, Megan, like
mhm.
almost like it gets tight, like everything feels like it's kind of tighter.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's very uncomfortable if it catches up to you. And it's easy to overdo it because you do start to feel a little bit better here
Mm.
and there. It's like any other recovery, right? As soon as you start feeling a little better from having the flu, you overdo it too. So it's a lot like that. It's easy to
exactly.
put your
Yeah,
recovery on the back burner when you have a
Mm.
baby as well.
for sure.
You're excited to finally feel good and like,
Yeah,
okay, now we're going to go do the thing, but
yeah,
it was a little too much too
Yeah.
yeah,
fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and it all kind of lines up with like, those days where you're like, okay, now my parents are going to come over and meet my baby. And you're like, mom's helping you, like peeling you off the couch because you can't get up by yourself and things like that. And it's like, I wish this wasn't about me. I wish this was about the baby.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it sounds like you both were very appreciative of having people in your lives that you
Mhm.
could turn to that have been there and that could kind of give you the heads up on that. So, as we kind of wrap things up a little bit, what would be those key takeaways? I've been writing notes, so I I got but like I guess if you could summarize Megan for yourself,
Mhm.
and with that recovery, what are those main things that you'd like to tell somebody who's maybe just about to go through it either the first time, or maybe it's not the first time, but maybe they might be faced with a C-section? So what could those things be that you would say, hey, this could be a really good thing to have a heads up about?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if you know that it's coming, it's a lot different. You can kind of look into things, whether you're in the headspace to do that or not, if it's been unexpected. But certainly when you're at the hospital, if it's something that wasn't planned, like my experience, don't be afraid to ask questions, and get the answer. Like don't let yourself kind of feel dismissed or not in control of the situation. And I think that was something that surprised me because I work in healthcare. I thought for sure I would advocate for myself. I would say, how long am I allowed to be induced for? How long is this going for? But I really didn't. I really took a passive approach, and I was really just being the patient. So I would say don't be afraid to ask your nurses questions. If they have to go get the OB, they can get the OB. It's your right as a patient to know what's going on and to be in the driver's seat of your care. So don't feel like you're being a bother, and don't feel like you're supposed to know what's going on because you've never done it before. So don't feel,
That's it right there.
yeah,
Sorry, Megan,
don't
but
feel
like
like you're
don't
being
feel like you're
annoying.
being a
Yeah.
bother. Yeah, it's not about like I don't want them to like think I'm annoying or something. Like who cares? Who cares if somebody thinks you're
Yeah.
annoying? But you're not annoying. You're not.
Or even like think
But yeah,
that you don't know what you're doing, or like what the next step is because you've never done it before, and it should be explained to you, and it should be explained to you in terms that you understand. So if it's all medical jargon, don't be afraid to say, I don't know what that means. Please explain it again, and can you explain it to my
mhm.
husband, or whatever it is.
Well, and you mentioned in your story that actually you asked your husband, can you say
Yeah,
so and so, like getting him to advocate for you, and that is a big piece that I
very
talk about
helpful.
in classes a lot because you're in labor potentially, and you need somebody else that's maybe of a little bit of a saner mind to maybe ask those questions for you or
Yeah.
do that for you. So yeah, having partners involved is huge.
And the other thing I would say would be doing some postnatal care for sure. So there's a lot of focus on the pre baby, but I feel like post baby, it's more like, how are you doing? Are you sleeping? But it's like, take care of your body as well. So going to some postnatal classes, particularly like focusing on C section recovery, has been so helpful. I know Melissa and I were saying how bad it was in those early weeks, but it's a lot better now. I feel like I can do everything I want to do. And I feel like my core and pelvic floor are strong, and with the help of physio and everything. So that's something that I've made an effort to make sure that I go to every week. It's hard. Sometimes you bring a baby too. So sometimes it's hard to get out of the house, but even if I'm only there for half the class, I feel like I owe it to myself to, rehab my body. And
Yeah, beautiful.
yeah,
How about yourself, Melissa? Was that similar for you or different
Yeah, I
maybe?
mean, I would echo everything Megan just said. 6 months out, it's certainly not all the way there. I still have little like pains here and there. I'm like, oh man, yeah, I did have layers of my flesh cut open. But overall, things do heal up really nicely from a C-section. That's a nice perk. Yeah, I mean, there's also the planning around not being able to drive for 6 weeks is a big thing when you've got baby related and you related appointments to go to and you can't drive to them. Um, so that
Mhm.
was that was hard, and definitely by the end of the 6 weeks, I felt very ready to drive, both for my independence, but also physically, I was ready. Um, and yeah, I think really, especially for those that are faced with a situation where perhaps it is a planned C-section and you're going in to that planned C-section, it is a valid way to birth a baby. It's hard and it's scary to lay there with a curtain up and be awake for a huge surgery. It's scary when you're laying there thinking, is my baby out or is my baby in? And it's weird to not know that, and, advocate for being kept in the loop with all of those things. I was lucky to have a really wonderful
Mhm.
nurse by my head who was giving me a play by play, and I was able to ask her questions. And, I think because you may not have that experience that you picture of, like, your baby being thrown on your chest all, you know, that doesn't mean that you don't get to know when your baby's born and hear your baby's first cry, and perhaps your husband cuts their umbilical, or your partner cuts their umbilical cord, and all of that can still happen. And so, you know, it's that part is nice, but it's an extremely valid way to birth a baby and a hard way to birth a baby too.
Mm,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, things like the table isn't flat, like they angle it a little bit so you feel like you're a little bit upside down. I was glad I knew that going in because it feels really strange for a minute. Trying to think of other things. Usually, as long as the baby is healthy and okay, they put the baby on your chest, so it's the same. Although my baby wasn't okay for a couple minutes, so I didn't quite have that right away, but she did end up on my chest, so that was really good. So you still get that bonding, like golden hour kind of bonding time. It's really helpful to know how long a C-section takes.
Mm-hmm.
Typical C-section with, not a lot of complications. The baby's out within 10 minutes of them laying you down. And then it's about another 45 minutes after that it's finally done. Um, to me, it was super overwhelming at first because as soon as I felt my legs go numb, I was like, I don't want to feel like this for an hour.
Mm.
That was a really overwhelming feeling.
Mm.
But then as soon as I had my baby on my chest, I like time didn't matter.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just things like that. So having someone kind of walk you through exactly what happens, and I mean they're all different and they can go many directions depending on what's happening. But
I think it's helpful knowing that about the golden hour too, because I mean, you read a lot about it beforehand. And I think I knew that the baby could be placed on my chest. And he was. But again, similar to you, Melissa, that he wasn't okay for a little bit there. So they did have to take him away and just kind of give him some oxygen and stuff. But after that, I was feeling so overwhelmed that I didn't really want him on my chest. I felt like I couldn't really get a full breath. So they told my husband just to rip open his scrubs, and they put the baby right on my husband's chest, which I think is a really good thing to know too. Like if it's not offered, that is something that you can ask for, is to have the baby go on your husband's chest. Because really, I think the skin to skin contact, it doesn't have to be mom, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the
Mm-hmm.
benefits it has for your baby. So
Yeah.
mhm.
that
And
was
if the
helpful.
NICU team is
Yeah.
involved at all, generally they cut the umbilical cord and then your partner can trim it. So that's another thing that I didn't know that going in, and I was a little bit like, man, that's another thing, right? But it was still good, and he felt very proud of himself. So,
That's nice. It sounds like, in a lot of ways, and we know this about the IWK, it's where you and myself happen to have our babies, is they're really on top of the skin to skin and those kinds of things, and want to do all of those things with you or for the baby. Like, anyway, all that to say is it's nice to have those teams around,
Yeah,
but also to know that a little advocating for yourself, if and when needed, is always welcomed, for sure.
definitely.
Yeah. Sweet. If you're looking for more information or support along your parenting journey, check out birthbabysleep.ca. That's where you're going to find prenatal classes, postpartum and new baby resources, and sleep support during the childhood years. You can now join our Bringing Up Baby community membership as well, which has tons of additional benefits to helping you through all kinds of sleep challenges and transitions, navigating the transition to solid foods, and even your transition through early parenthood. If you have any questions, just send them my way. Lastly, but certainly not least, if you got something out of this episode or our show in general, leaving a rating or a quick review goes a really long way to helping others find us. So please consider leaving one. That's all for now. I'm Ashley Cooley, and we'll see you back here next time.